If you are still waiting for a Russian army to march down and fulfill the prophecy of Ezekiel 38, you are watching the wrong superpower and are missing the pieces being put into place at this very moment. For 50 years, the late great planet Earth and other prophecy teachers have locked millions of Christians into a static 1970 Cold War script that history has completely abandoned. We were taught to watch for a Russian-led invasion from the north and a massive army of Chinese forces crossing the Euphrates from the east. But the prophets, they never drew a map of Russia. They drew a perfect, equidistant circle directly around Israel. And if you open your eyes to the headlines breaking right now, the specific nations occupying the north, the southern, the western, and the eastern boundaries of that circle are rapidly consolidating into a massive multinational axis. They aren't gathering under a Russian or even a Chinese banner. They are locking arms under a Turkish one. When Hal Lindsey wrote Chapter 6 in 1970, his timeline was hostage to the morning headlines. He leaned heavily on the prominence of Egypt in the Arab world under President Nasser, completely failing to foresee that Egypt would sign a historic peace treaty with Israel by the end of that decade. To force the current events of 1970 into a future history, Lindsey claimed on pages 75 and 76 that Daniel 11:40 described Egypt launching an attack on Israel, which would trigger a retaliatory invasion by Russia as the king of the north. But let's read what the text actually says. And at the time of the end, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships, and he will enter lands, overflow them, and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall. Notice the immediate logic failure. The king of the south does not attack Israel. The king of the south collides with the king of the north directly. Israel is simply invaded as a catastrophic consequence of this tit-for-tat superpower clash. As the northern king sweeps south, Daniel 11 verse 43 tells us Egypt is completely conquered, stripped of its treasures, and removed as a power player. But look at the two nations standing right next to Egypt. And Libyans and Ethiopians will follow at his heels. Lindsey writes on those pages that Egypt will not escape the Russian invasion force, and that the Libyans and Ethiopians will be at his steps, claiming that this means they would be completely subjected, controlled, and marching in lockstep as conquered territories under the northern military commander's boots. Here we have to be very specific with who and what is being referred to. Many translations of the Bible will insert the modern equivalent country to the ancient word that the Hebrew used. However, there are often translation errors or speculation about who these people groups actually were. We see that here with the two words, Libyans and Ethiopians. We'll get into more detail shortly, but to start, Libya is roughly equivalent to the ancient tribe of Put, and Ethiopia is roughly the area of Cush. This is important to realize because the Bible translations of Daniel 11 use different terms for the same areas being discussed in Ezekiel 38 and 39. So, to be clear, Daniel does not say Cush or Ethiopia and Put or Libya, are conquered. They are already listed as active allies of Gog in Ezekiel 38. In the original Hebrew idiom, having these tribes at his heels or at his steps simply means they were already allies and are obedient to the northern king in the actions being taken, moving in rapid lockstep with the conquest agenda of their leader. Lindsey was very sloppy when he combined the timelines of these two passages, but he needed a massive block of Black Africa and Arab nations that Russia could violently overrun to match his Cold War script. But that narrative is completely absent from the text. Let's get into more detail about these two particular tribes. To pull off his sleight of hand, Lindsey had to reassign traditional tribal names to modern countries that are not their equivalent, though. When Ezekiel and Daniel draw the map, they aren't looking at a 20th century atlas. They describe a perfect equidistant circle of regional influence centered entirely around Israel. Look at the coordinates here. The north, Meshech and Tubal, pointing directly to the northern area of Turkey. The west, go an equal distance west across the Mediterranean, and you hit Put. Lindsey called this Libya, but that country didn't exist until 1934 and was an amalgamation of several North African tribes. Put is specifically only eastern Libya, right next to Egypt. Benghazi is its main city. The south, go an equal distance south down the Nile, and you hit Kush. Lindsey called this Ethiopia. However, the tribe of Kush was ancient Nubia, actually modern Sudan and Upper Egypt. This confusion results because the name Ethiopia was historically used by the Greeks to describe any of the black-skinned people of that area. In 1941, when the modern country of Ethiopia chose a name, they chose a name out of antiquity that had absolutely nothing to do with their ancient heritage. Kush specifically refers to the people of modern Sudan. To the east, there's the Euphrates River as the boundary to the Far East, which we will look into shortly. So what we have here is an equidistant circle of influence. This isn't a global multi-continental superalliance. It is a highly localized, equidistant regional circle. And when we look at how these exact regions are behaving right now, the Russia is Gog-Magog theory completely disintegrates. Hal Lindsey wrote in 1970 that a pro-Soviet alliance would emerge in Libya. Today, defenders of the 1970s view point to Russia's military expansion in North Africa as proof, claiming Russia has transformed eastern Libya into its primary military gateway to the entire African continent. And on the surface, the data looks compelling. However, with the collapse of the al-Assad regime in Syria at the end of 2024, this spurred Russia to find an alternative for access to the region. In February 2025, an agreement was made for access to the eastern Libya port of Tobruk and the associated airbase located nearby. As of June 2026, satellite imagery and intelligence tracking show that Russia's state-controlled military group, the Afrika Korps, which absorbed the old Wagner structures under the direct control of the Russian military defense, has drastically expanded its presence at 6 major Libyan air bases. Russia has positioned thousands of troops on the ground in Libya, effectively establishing a permanent military staging ground along NATO's southern flank and using Air Wagner cargo flights to move heavy weaponry freely through the region. Down in Sudan, the literal land of Kush, Russia has embedded itself directly into the state systems of the Sudanese government, acting as a critical financial and military stabilizer during their ongoing civil war. On June 23, 2026, the Sudanese-Russian Political Consultation Committee in Moscow finalized sweeping multi-sector protocols. Sudan and Russia explicitly elevated their ties to a strategic partnership, with Sudan actively inviting Russia to lead its post-war reconstruction, infrastructure, and to revive energy and oil agreements. The crown jewel of this relationship was the proposed long-term 25-year naval agreement, giving the Russian Navy direct access to Sudanese ports. The Kremlin has been actively finalizing plans for a dedicated naval base in Port Sudan capable of hosting nuclear-powered warships, giving Moscow a direct chokehold on global shipping lanes. Furthermore, in October 2025, Russia integrated its financial systems with the Central Bank of Sudan, providing digital payment, training, and sanctions evasion frameworks for securing direct access to Sudan's massive gold mining operations to fund its own international efforts. However, the naval deal has been on and off again since that time. The latest update at the beginning of 2026 is that the deal is currently paused. More importantly, pop prophecy commentators mistook a temporary military presence for a permanent fulfillment. They completely ignored the critical fact that Libya is a country divided, west and east. The west is under the control of Tripoli, but the east is separated in part due to tribal differences. This eastern portion is exactly the area of Put. And look who is systematically entering the Eastern Territory right now. It is Turkey that has established a permanent military footprint there. As early as December 25, 2025, independent monitors noted that as Turkey expands its contacts in eastern Libya, it is entering an area where Russian influence is already entrenched, raising questions about whether the two countries will compete or coordinate in the eastern Mediterranean and North Africa. On December 2nd, 2025, Turkey and Libya signed massive maritime boundary agreements connecting their exclusive economic zones. This legal corridor effectively cuts right through or right across the eastern Mediterranean, giving Ankara direct leverage over offshore gas fields, energy pipelines, and migration routes right on Israel's and Egypt's western doorstep. By April 12, 2026, following key defense pacts, the Turkish parliament voted to extend its formal military deployment in Libya. Turkish armed forces, military advisors, and drone teams are permanently stationed on the ground. Turkey now has oversight of western Libya ports and coastal waters, including access to offshore gas fields, while Libya has become a primary live firing testing ground and major customer for Turkey's advanced Bayraktar TB2 drone fleets, cementing reliance on Turkish defense systems. This pattern of Turkish override is repeating perfectly in the land of Kush as well. While commentators were watching Russia try to finalize a port deal, Turkey quietly locked down the entire logistical and military ecosystem of Sudan. On December 23, 2025, Turkey signed a comprehensive twinning pact linking its major port of Mersin directly to Port Sudan, stepping into run logistics, operations, and trade management for the Sudanese government. On the military front, intelligence reports exposed that Turkey's advanced Bayraktar's TB2 and Akesini combat drones became the decisive asset on the battlefield, enabling the Sudanese army to completely shift the balance of power and reclaim major strategic sectors in the capital. This relationship went all the way to the top when President Erdogan hosted Sudanese Army Chief General Burhan in Ankara on June 2, 2026, explicitly locking down defense integration, training, and technical support. To cement this alignment, on May 22, 2026, the two nations concluded extensive ministerial sessions to deep link their energy, mining, and agricultural sectors. Following this, on June 30th, 2026, Turkish contractors officially entered an exclusive reconstruction for resources framework, gaining direct access to Sudanese gold commodities in exchange for rebuilding the state's shattered infrastructure. Just like in Put, Turkey is systematically moving in, providing the high-tech firepower and financial lifelines that bind the ancient land of Kush straight into Ankara's orbit. These developments further cement the view that Gog is the ruler of Turkey, not Russia. For years, commentators claimed Russia's military presence in eastern Libya proved Moscow was the head of the Ezekiel 38 alliance. But they spoke too soon. Look at what is happening on the ground right now. Turkey, the true geographical location of ancient Magog, has crossed the Mediterranean. The rulers of Benghazi, the literal soil of ancient Put, are turning away from exclusive reliance on Russia in order to sign defense, intelligence, and maritime pacts with Ankara. The alignment isn't consolidating under a Russian banner. It is consolidating under a Turkish one. Hal Lindsey's static 1970 Cold War paradigm is being entirely erased by a living, moving Neo-Ottoman reality. What makes this timing so remarkable is that if I had written this script even a year or two ago, the situation would have looked entirely different. The sudden collapse of the Syrian regime at the end of 2024, Russia's frantic scramble into Tobruk in early 2025, and Turkey's systematic diplomatic and military absorption of both eastern Libya and Sudan through late 2025 and into mid-2026, they're all happening right now. And with the decimation of Iran's influence in the region due to the joint USA-Israel attack of early 2026, Turkey is rapidly seeking to fill the power vacuum that has been left behind. It is my contention that we have entered the final 70th week spoken of by Daniel. This began on February 27th, 2026, the date the attack against Iran began. There is another video which goes into great detail about how this was determined from the information in Daniel 9. However, if this is indeed the case, all the pieces should be rapidly shifting into their final form at increasing velocity. And that is exactly what is happening right now. As we move into the next phase of Hal Lindsey's future history, he turns his attention toward the Far East in Chapter 7. Relying heavily on the 1970 Cold War environment, Lindsey lays out a prediction of a massive Eastern military force that he repeatedly calls the Asian Horde. He bases this entire scenario on a specific passage in Revelation chapter 16. And the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river, the Euphrates, and its water was dried up, so that the way would be prepared for the kings from the east. Historically, the Euphrates River has always been considered the definitive border between the East and the Far East. This isn't a local neighboring conflict. The text describes a massive force coming from a great distance, completely outside of the immediate region. To understand the nature of this force, we have to look back at the description given earlier during the sixth trumpet. Revelation 9:14-16 and 18. Release the 4 angels who have been bound at the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were released, so that they would kill 1/3 of mankind. And the number of the armies of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them. 1/3 of mankind was killed by these 3 plagues, by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone. According to the text, the Euphrates is dried up to allow the easy crossing of an unprecedented 200 million man army. But they don't just cross. They leave monstrous carnage and death in their wake, wiping out 1/3 of all mankind. By today's number, that represents the immediate death of 2.75 billion people. Lindsey rightly points out that the type of battle described here, with columns of fire, smoke, and suffocating brimstone, sounds exactly like a first-century description of a modern thermonuclear war. But right after making this observation, Lindsey derails his entire analysis. He spends the rest of the chapter focusing exclusively on the Asian horde of one particular country, China. He tries to weld the communism of the Soviet Union together with the communism of China, claiming they are locked in a joint quest for world domination. And that is Lindsey's major wrong assumption. He assumed the phrase kings of the East can only mean East Asian. He completely forgot that there are more races, more cultures, and far more powerful nations sitting immediately east of the Euphrates than just China. The original text does not refer to the attacking force with a generic modern label like East Asia. In the original Aramaic and its Greek translation, it uses the phrase, the kings from the rising sun. We've previously identified that the land of Magog, the home of the king of the north, in Ezekiel 38 is referring to Turkey. And if you look immediately east of the Euphrates today, the nation making the most significant world-altering military agreements with Turkey is Pakistan. Look at the intelligence reports coming out right now in 2026. On January 9th, 2026, defense reports confirm Turkey entered advanced talks to join the Saudi Arabia-Pakistan Defense Agreement. By June 5th, 2026, details emerged finalizing a formal Pakistan-Saudi Arabia-Turkey trilateral pact. This isn't a basic trade agreement. It is a strategic mutual defense pact with an explicit collective defense clause stating that an attack on one is an attack on all. At the same time, Turkey is a member of NATO, who also have the same mutual defense pact among its member nations. Modern intelligence analysts are watching the rapid consolidation of a massive power triad. Qatar provides the sovereign wealth and financial liquidity. Turkey provides the NATO standard conventional forces and drone superiority. And Pakistan provides the deep manpower and a fully operational nuclear shield. Unlike standard Middle Eastern alliances, pulling Pakistan into Turkey's sphere of influence introduces a nation with fully functional nuclear warheads and advanced ballistic missile delivery systems, creating an explicit counterweight against Israel. And with Iran significantly weakened following the severe military degradation of the 2026 conflict known as Operation Epic Fury, Turkey is systematically stepping into the vacuum to lead the Eastern Islamic forces in its quest to restore the Ottoman Empire. Turkey has even secured the literal geography of the river itself. On January 30th of 2026, Turkey finalized a regional security pact with Damascus that systematically dismantled the Kurdish military structures completely east of the Euphrates. By neutralizing local resistance along the river's eastern banks, Turkey has cleared its southern border, leaving the highway down through the Euphrates completely open for cooperative military deployments with its eastern allies. This brings us back to the most controversial number in the book of Revelation, the 200 million man army. Critics have argued for centuries that this number is purely symbolic, claiming it is logistically impossible to field a force that size. And if you only look at the standard peacetime standing militaries, they are right. Today, no single country maintains an army anywhere near that scale. But when you calculate total available mobilization manpower in the direction of the rising sun, the math becomes indisputable. Look at the raw population data for this specific corridor right now in 2026. China holds a population of roughly 1.4 billion, with an available military manpower pool of 350 to 400 million men. India sits at 1.4 billion people, with a staggering available manpower pool of 662 million. Pakistan adds another 252 million people, with over 108 million available men. Combined, this single eastern corridor holds a total population of over 3 billion people, with an available military-aged male pool of 1.12 billion men. To field a literal army of 200 million, this bloc doesn't need an impossible miracle. Under total existential state conscription over the next 7 years, it only requires a draft rate of roughly 18% of their eligible male population. While India and Pakistan, or China, have traditionally been bitter rivals, the global geopolitical landscape is rapidly fracturing into a rigid East versus West dynamic. We are watching this consolidation happen along 3 distinct tracks. First, the Pakistan-Turkey pivot has locked Pakistan's 108 million available men and nuclear assets into a collective defense alliance backing Turkey's Western operations. Second, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, has cemented an ironclad partnership where China has spent the last decade building high-capacity highways, deep water ports, and rail lines running straight through Pakistan, creating a ready-made military deployment highway running from the Far East straight towards the borders of the Middle East. And third, the Indian wildcard. For a true 200 million man force to march west, India's massive population pool, which sees 24 million young men reach military age every single year, either becomes absorbed into an anti-Western military alliance or acts as a parallel mobilizing force moving west along a separate track. To understand how these pieces fit together, you have to realize that the relationship between China and Pakistan is one of the most resilient and ironclad partnerships in modern history. In international diplomacy, both nations officially refer to each other as Iron Brothers. This alliance didn't form overnight. It has been systematically engineered over decades to secure a direct land bypass around global maritime choke points. It began in the 1960s with the construction of the Karakoram Highway, a massive engineering feat cutting through the mountain ranges to connect western China directly with northern Pakistan. Right now, in our 2026 timeline, both nations are executing a massive upgrade of this highway to handle heavy military and industrial transport. On the military side, China has long been Pakistan's primary source for conventional hardware. They co-develop advanced combat systems and run continuous joint maneuvers like the Warriors Army drills and the Eagles Air Force exercises. On May 28, 2026, the Chinese Defense Ministry formally issued a joint declaration to significantly deepen this practical military-to-military cooperation and tactical intelligence sharing. What started as a basic highway cooperation has transformed into the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, known as CPEC, the absolute crown jewel of China's Global Belt and Road Initiative. During Phase 1, China poured roughly $46 billion into Pakistan to build a massive network of paved national motorways. Here in 2026, under CPEC Phase 2, the alliance has transitioned into a full industrialization and regional connectivity. The ultimate endpoint of this infrastructure is Pakistan's coastline, which stretches over 1,000 kilometers along the Arabian Sea and features 3 major international seaports, including the crown jewel, Gwandar Port. Gwandar is the deepest naturally shielded warm water port in the world, and it has been leased to China until 2059. By connecting the western Chinese province of Xinjiang directly down through the mountain passes of the Gwandar port, China has secured immediate deep water access right on the doorstep of the Middle East. When tracing the movement from the direction of the rising sun toward Euphrates, these seaports provide a ready-made marine-to-overland pipeline. A military force or a logistical supply line moving out of the Far East doesn't have to face international maritime bottlenecks or vulnerable choke points like the Straits of Malacca. The physical, heavy-tonnage infrastructure required to move vast amounts of resources and manpower straight to the edge of the Middle Eastern theater has been actively under construction for over half a century. Hal Lindsey's fabricated future did not see any of this, but the highway, it's already built. When we step back and look at the entire landscape, Hal Lindsey's fabricated 1970 future completely falls apart. He needed a static world where foreign global superpowers violently colonized the Middle East. He completely missed the reality that the power center is already inside the region. Look at the map Ezekiel and Daniel drew. It is a perfect, equidistant circle radiating out from Israel. To the west, in the ancient soil of Put, the rulers of eastern Libya are turning away from Moscow to sign comprehensive defense and intelligence pacts with Ankara, Turkey. To the south, in the ancient land of Kush, Turkey has quietly locked down the entire logistical, military, and economic pipeline of Sudan, supplying the decisive drone firepower on the battlefield and taking over operational control of Port Sudan. And to the east, from the literal direction of the rising sun, Turkey has bypassed the weakened remnants of Iran to extend its hand toward or across the Euphrates, locking in a trilateral collective defense pact with Pakistan, binding a nuclear shield and over 100 million available men into its direct orbit. Turkey is a core member of NATO, possessing the second largest standing military force in the entire alliance. Yet, it is systematically using that NATO standard military dominance, advanced defense manufacturing, and sovereign wealth networks to build an independent multinational axis. This isn't speculative guesswork for a distant future. The high-capacity highways and the deep water ports, the cleared riverbanks, and the mutual defense treaties are a living, breathing reality unfolding right now. The static Cold War paradigm is dead. The Neo-Ottoman alignment is active, alert, and moving exactly into its designated position. As far as I can tell, this is information and prophetic insights that no one else is talking about. Most of the popular teachers and channels are still on the Russia, Russia, Russia bandwagon and haven't investigated all the aspects that we've explored over the past 2 presentations. You now have the inside scoop as to where the prophecies are coalescing right at this very moment. But this raises the ultimate final question. If Turkey is systematically consolidating the northern, western, southern, and eastern nodes of this equidistant circle, what happens when this consolidated multinational engine finally turns its eyes toward the center, toward the beautiful land? In part 5, we are going to untangle this final explosive wire in this script. We're going to dive into the specific tactical blueprints of the invasion itself, tracing the exact geographic routes, the sudden regional triggers, and the catastrophic clash on the mountains of Israel that brings this Neo-Ottoman reality to its ultimate designated climax. You will not want to miss it. Stay tuned.